I didn't really know my father. Mom had told me very little of him as I grew up. All I know is that he and my mother were never actually together. She was a stewardess in her 20s and flew all over the world. One of the places she visited most frequently was Los Angeles. She had served all sorts of rich, famous, and important people, and the implication was that she had seen this man frequently on her many flights to the city. I had these fantasies that my dad was a famous celebrity that would someday come take me away, show me his world of glitz and glamour. It wasn't until he died that I found out the truth. See, my father was a big-time loan shark of sorts. He owned one of those shitty corner stores that have cheap signs all over them. You've seen them, I'm sure. Money now and payday loans here, etc. This man made his living handing out loans out to aspiring actors, musicians, writers, directors, even porn starlets, all of them trying to get by while they attempt to make a name for themselves. He fed on the desperate and took advantage of their plights. Now, don't get me wrong, he ended up becoming extremely wealthy through this, but it still seems fucked up on a moral level to me. He always made sure to get his money back one way or another. For those that would make it in the biz, he was sure to jack up the interest on their loans. It was a car crash that ended him, right outside of his office. This is when I found out he knew who I was. My mother would only tell me the same thing over and over again after I got a letter from his lawyer. All I knew about him was that he was wealthy, handsome, and charismatic, and up until I spent a night with him, I thought he was very kind. But once he found out I was pregnant with you, he severed all contact. I decided against getting a lawyer and chasing child support. I just let the scumbag go. This is all she would tell me. It was all she knew of him. So, I flew to LA to visit with his lawyer. Apparently, he had something for me, but he could only hand it over in person. The lawyer read a letter that was to me from my father. Apparently, around the time I was 15, his guilt from abandoning us got the best of him. He hunted me down through social media. He saw a young version of himself in my pictures, and the guilt crippled him. Rather than trying to force his way into my life, he decided to write out an early will, leaving me all of his money, his cabin in the hills of the Ozark region of Missouri, a picture album from his life, and also a massive document from him to me. The lawyer said the document was a detailed account of who my father was, where he came from, and why he had left us. That immediately went to the bottom of my luggage. I frankly didn't give a shit about what he had to say, but the money I was more than happy to take. A month or so later, all the legal hoops were taken care of, and his money was now in my accounts. The keys to the cabin sat on my nightstand. Now, I can't explain it, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. I had a need to get away and specifically go to that cabin in the Ozarks. So, I called my mom, all of my friends, and my girlfriend, and told them I was going to have the place inspected to sell it. That was a lie, though. I just wanted to go and see it. I wanted to spend some time away from the city. I don't know why I was so drawn to it, but as soon as I saw a picture of the place, I needed to go. Ever since I saw that picture, I could see it in my dreams. I hear people telling me to go. The trip was long, but good music and 5 energy drinks kept me sane. The whole drive took place more or less in my mind. My eyes were watching the traffic and GPS, but in my head, all I can think about was my life. Finding out about my father made me wonder why my mom never married. I never had a stepfather. Instead, she seemed married to the bottle for as long as I can remember. She worked hard and provided, don't get me wrong. But nights that could have been spent watching movies and talking about school like normal kids my age, instead consisted of me playing video games while mom drank until she passed out. I tried not to hold it against her, but in the back of my mind, Old Crow was what she cared about most, not me. It was as if she used it to distance herself from me as I grew older. Before I knew it, I was in Missouri and passing over Bagnall Dam at Lake of the Ozarks. When I found the access road, I began feeling excited. Turning off the highway, I found myself on an old back road that probably hadn't had any maintenance done in like 20 years. After an hour or so along this road, I realized I hadn't seen a single other car since I turned off the highway. I wondered just how secluded this cabin was. The idea of being alone for miles and miles was very enticing. Finally, I found the mailbox to my new cabin. The driveway was all dirt, incredibly curvy, and about 2 miles long. The entire driveway was surrounded by woods, Tall, ancient trees stretch out as far as I could see. The woods were so dense that the late afternoon sun barely shone through. I had an uneasy feeling the entire drive up to the house, as if there was 1,000 animal eyes staring at me through the foliage. Like every move I made was being judged and calculated. It was a huge relief when I finally got to the cabin, which was apparently built in the 80s, but it looked like it had barely been visited since then. Inside was a totally different story though. It was fully furnished, had paintings mounted on the walls and a big screen TV. The part that struck me most was that the TV, couches, kitchen appliances, and lighting were all brand new, almost if they had just been delivered and plugged in. In the corner sat a high-end computer, and the router and modem was wired to where it looked new and expensive looking. The LED lights on both devices showed internet access working as intended. My first order of business was to go outside. I got unpacked and went out the back door and wandered the yard for a while. The cabin sat in a clearing that created an almost perfect circle around the building, which was nestled in the exact center. The grass in the yard was tall, not overgrown and weedy, but definitely untouched for the most part. I did notice a lack of any twigs or sticks in the yard. With all these trees around, there was sure to be some branches breaking, ending up in the clearing. It was almost like somebody was keeping the yard clean. But how is that possible? Nobody even knew of this place other than my father. I shrugged it off and moved on. I opted to explore the woods some. Behind the house there was a narrow old trail, barely visible from the vegetation that had all but reclaimed it. It was getting late, so I was sure not to let myself go too far. Plus the land was very unfamiliar to me. That same feeling I had on the drive up began to creep up my spine. The deeper I went into the trees, the worse that uneasy feeling got. I tried to ignore it at first, just wanting to explore. I was about 100 yards away from the house when I began to shiver. It wasn't a particularly cold night, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I noticed it was almost nighttime. I wondered how I let it get so late. It was as if I wasn't even paying attention to my surroundings, despite the fact that my eyes were constantly looking for whatever animal was staring at me. I don't mean to sound so dramatic, but it felt exactly like they describe it in the movies. Something was watching me, and I couldn't escape its sight. I had enough of the woods for one day. I began to walk back when the eyes on me were accompanied by a strange sound. It was quiet at first, almost inaudible over my own footsteps. Then I realized it was voices. Incoherent babble being whispered back and forth. I couldn't be sure if it was the same, but it reminded me of my dreams of the cabin. The same whispers asking me to come visit the place. When the voices began getting louder, I started walking faster. I heard the dry crunch of twig and dead leaves. I dismissed it for a deer or something at first, trying to not let myself believe that anything dangerous was out there with me. But what happened next I simply can't explain. The footsteps were all around me now. The voices getting louder or closer. I was running on a trail clear of most obstructions that exit the forest. But somehow the footsteps were keeping pace on both sides of me and behind me, despite the thick, lush patch of woods. I broke into a dead sprint. I could see the porch light of the cabin ahead of me, and all I could think to do was run it as hard as I could. The voices and footsteps were almost on me. I could feel things brushing against my jacket and the hair on the back of my head as I ran. I was almost pissing myself with fear by the time I got to the tree line and entered the yard. The second I was clear of the trees, everything went completely silent. All I could hear was my own breathing as I stood there near the back door of the cabin, staring into the trees and looking for any movement. But there was nothing. Not a sound in the night air aside from my own racing heart and labored breathing.